Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video I will be talking a bit about subtlety rogues and the fact that they got nerfed in patch 8.1. I think a lot of you guys will be logging on, especially in EU and maybe even Australia, to the patch to find out that yes, there's something missing from your subtlety rogue. There is a buff or a passive that is now gone called Shuriken Combo. Normally it would be sometime after or appear somewhere after Shadow's Grasp, but it is gone. At first I thought maybe we should check Shuriken Storm, maybe it was baked into the playstyle. But no, it looks like it is gone. Shuriken Combo is the ability that allowed you to increase the damage of your Eviscerate depending on how many targets Shuriken Storm hit. With this comboed really well with Shuriken Storm because Shuriken Storm would generate a combo point for every enemy hit. So if you have 4 enemies in front of you and you hit them with a Shuriken Storm, you generate 4 combo points. That means you would get a buff of about 8% damage increase per combo point spent for your Eviscerate. So that would make a pretty beefy Eviscerate. With all the bursty playstyle that Subtlety would have, with Fine Weakness on top of Deeper Stratagem for 5% more execute damage, Dark Shadow for 25% on top of that, and all your trinkets, Symbols of Death, everything together with a big mastery pool, you could do a lot of damage. Blizzard curbed that completely. So Subtlety Rogues playing big damage and doing about like what, 80k burst on Zul, gone. Subtlety Rogues having a lot of fun in Shrine of the Storm with the first and second boss, which is what I personally enjoyed, gone. What allowed Subtlety Rogues, I feel like, to have this kind of playstyle, I thought it was really cool. What I personally liked about it is, first of all, it was kind of fun to abuse it, I'll be honest. As someone who is not a Subtlety Rogue main, I actually brought it into Zul Mythic and Shrine of the Storm, 2 dungeons where you can just abuse the hell out of it. You can just Shuriken Storm on around bosses, just pull a little bit extra small adds that are not really threatening to the tank, and just pump that big Eviscerates into the boss, making certain boss fights that are about 4 to 5 minutes long down to like 2-3 minutes. It was actually really cool. I thought it kind of reminded me about Shadow Priest Surrender to Madness back in Legion, where they would use Surrender to Madness, especially in the last boss, and it was kind of like a very skillful playstyle that ramped up in haste, so your spells would, you just need to press them faster and faster and faster, and the faster you could do it, the better you were at it, the longer you could stay in that stance before that talent eventually killed you. So it was really cool to watch some great Shadow Priests perform such great damage and pump in Mythic Plus dungeons. But Blizzard nerfed it back in the day, and I guess now they're nerfing it here. Although Subtlety Rogues, I mean, the playstyle it's very simple. You just Shuriken Storm, put up debuff, Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate, Shuriken Storm. Eviscerate is nowhere near as complex as the Shadow Priest playstyle from back in Legion. Nowhere near. So yeah, I guess it makes sense for them to nerf this, because it was a little bit too silly and was a bit busted. But I thought it was super fun, I thought it was super cool, and I feel like it gave the spec identity. And I always like the idea that in dungeons, for example, certain bosses and even fights and even whole dungeons become a lot more trivial if you bring certain classes. You bring a class with D and Rage in like King's Rest, bam, first half of the dungeon, very easy, don't have to worry about it. You bring a bunch of classes that can purge in Wake Rest, bam, you don't have to worry about the magical elements. So certain classes made certain dungeons easier, and I always very much like that. Is it bad though? Is it the end of the world? No, the sky is not falling. So Subtlety Rogues is simply brought down to the state where all the classes are. I guess it's a question of, is Subtlety Rogue going to be that good now compared to the other specs? But we'll get to that in a second. So how is Subtlety AoE going to look like? Well, if you're going to go for big burst in AoE, hopefully you'll have as many enemies as you can. Subtlety still has a dead spot in Cleave. 2 or 3 targets, 4 targets even is a bit dead spot. At 5 or 6 is where you're swimming in combo points and you can really get a lot of value out of your damage. And this is what I think is great about the spec, is when you can get that value damage. So this is what more or less it will all look like. Popping Shadow Blades, and you just pump big AoE, Secret Technique. As you can see, you can still do a lot of big damage, huge AoE damage. Refresh my Shadow Strike on an enemy, get that last Eviscerate for big one. So you're gonna basically do similar damage to that of other specs of Rogue. That's basically welcome to Subtlety now. Welcome to what Subtlety is at. So you won't really have that uniqueness to it, you'll still be able to focus down that one enemy. And I guess also what Blizzard did is buff Shuriken Storm by like what, 6%, and you can actually see this. I did a Mythic Plus and I looked at the damage, and it does seem like Blizzard kind of is trying to accommodate for the AoE damage single target nerfs slash buffs, I guess, the Blizzard's trying to do for subtlety, trying to make it a little bit easier with the transition from big single target damage to doing a bit more cleave AoE, but it's not nearly as big as you would hope for. But I guess it works. I ran a Mythic Plus 12 for Motherload with guildies after a raid. Our brains were fried and we didn't time that chest, but I mean, at least we did decent damage, and you can see subtlety is actually performing fairly well. It is still great for single target, especially during certain boss fights where you can just pump big damage, especially in the first boss. The AoE cleave, like the more enemies you grab, the more damage you will do. It definitely falls behind if you have like those 2 target, 3 target cleaves, because it's kind of like a dead spot. But the spec does fine. There's also other things that make the spec do fairly okay, is the first dance change. This trait has gotten changes that are giving you crit, and for next to abilities, now activating Shadow Dance grants you 2 combo points, which is kind of fun to play around for single target openers, especially with burst, and increases your haste by 1000. As a subtlety rogue, you mostly invest in most of your points into mastery, and crit, and versatility. When you go in for AoE Mythic Pluses, you are barely putting anything to haste. But with this trait, you get actually a lot of haste. So what this does is makes you a little bit more consistent, and some people have speculated that grabbing 2 of these, it will give you so much haste that it basically will have good energy regen for AoE in Mythic Plus, or in raids, or whatever. So maybe it might even offer you playstyles Shadow Focus, but what if about Night Stalker? More damage, and you'll just grab those traits to give you more energy. I think it offers you a lot more possibilities, a lot more playability for the spec, and maybe potential for you to try different talents. So I think that'll be the advantage of the change if you're trying to look like at a bright side, I guess, you know what I mean? So the spec itself is not terrible, and if you love playing subtlety, you can still play it. If you are a subtlety main, you can still do decent damage. Single target, I think it'll be fine as well for any PvE raids or dungeons. The question is though, if you're someone who is a rogue main, is there a point to bring in subtlety? For example, Assassination as a spec is simply, I think, better at dealing with single boss fights for AoE. It has consistency. It is really good at bursting single boss fights. It has really good at dealing with 2 target cleave, 3 target cleave, 4 targets, 5, 6, 7, more and more and more. So this spec does really, really well. Same thing goes for Outlaw Rogue. Outlaw is really good compared to Subtlety. Subtlety is good at sustain AoE, pretty good at sustain cleave. Outlaw is insanely bursty at cleave and bursty at AoE, but sustain was on the boss. So Assassin is going to be bursty on the boss, which is great, and good sustain for AoE, very versatile and flexible. Outlaw is extremely versatile in how many enemies you fight. 1, 2, 3, more. The more you add, the more damage you basically do. And on single target boss fights, as long as you get in decent buffs, you should be doing fairly well as well. So you have these specs where Outlaw is great for AoE, consistent on single bosses. Assassination is consistent on AoE, 2 target, 3 target cleave, great for single target bosses. Where's Subtlety going to be at? You know, that's the biggest question that I have with Subtlety. Where does it fit in the puzzle? And where was that in terms of big burst damage where you could abuse it, where you could get your team to pull more adds and everybody has to stop DPSing nearly as heavily, you know? I thought it was perfect there. I thought it had a perfect spot for that. But right now, I don't really know how I feel. That's, I guess, where Subtlety is at right now. I don't know. Subtlety did get nerfed, but I think it'll be okay. If you're a Subtlety main, I think it'll be just fine. You got some new traits, so feel around to play with your talents. I guess we'll monitor, and I will make a Subtlety Rogue PvE guide in the near future for patch 8.1 with all the changes to give you guys the best possible builds that I can. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on the Subtlety Rogue changes for patch 8.1. Do you like the buffs? Do you like the nerfs? Do you think the sky is falling, or do you think it's not nearly as bad? And be honest in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.